Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the Backend Primer series, lecture 2, where we are going to talk about databases. And so I believe in the previous Backend Primer, you've learned about how to use Node and also like how to use Express. And these two are a very powerful backend framework that allows you to do like a lot of things. For example, you can like build a server and then do a bunch of like computation using the backend API. And there's one piece kind of like still missing in the backend, which is a database. So essentially, first of all, what is a database? Database is where you can store a large amount of data in a computer system. It's pretty similar to a file system. So essentially, like your like Finder in the macOS system, it's kind of like a database, but instead it's a file system. A database is usually for storing different kinds of data. So say if you upload a photo on your Instagram, and then the photo and the related text will all be stored in a big database for Instagram. And when you try to like remove a friend from a Snapchat, like your databases, like your own profile database, your friend will actually be removed from the database. And this is kind of like an intuitive understanding of database. And let's get into like what's actually is a databases. So there are like two types of databases. One is SQL database and one is NoSQL database. And SQL database is what you expect for like a very traditional database. And it's essentially, it looks something like this. So it's essentially a table. And then as you can see, there are like different fields here. This is a name field, an age field, and a country field. And so database is just like that. So essentially like you'll have different fields or different column names, and then it will follow by columns. And these rows are called entries. So essentially like here, you can see there are like 4 entries in this database. And so let's look at the first entry. So the first entry, it says the name is Natalia, and age is 11, country is Iceland. And essentially like this is the information for the person Talia. And there's also like a second row for Nate, and age is 6, country. Why is it country? That's so weird. Yeah, but whatever. This is just the image I found on the internet. And essentially like, yeah, it's essentially like SQL database is it looks kind of like a table. And you interact with the SQL database in kind of like a table format as well. And we'll cover this. We won't cover this. If you're interested in this, you can feel free to check out other backend lecture series. But now we are going to focus on NoSQL databases. Now, why do we actually focus on NoSQL databases instead of like traditional SQL databases? It's because NoSQL database is actually easier to learn, because like the data structure should be something very familiar. As you can see, like here, it's essentially just a JSON formatting data, and the database that we're going to use, which is called MongoDB, actually format data in this kind of like JSON-like way. And it's pretty intuitive to learn if you already like very familiar with JavaScript and also like JSON formatting. Essentially, instead of storing an entry as a row, you store an entry as a like JSON formatted object. So as you can see here, this is like one entry within the MongoDB database. It has a first name field, a surname field, a cell field, also like a bunch of other fields. You can see also there are also like nested fields. So essentially like fields can be nested. Also, these are the values of the field. So essentially like the first name will be followed by Powell, surname will be followed by Miller. And when you're trying to like look up, say, specific object, you can then say like, I will find an object that has the first name of Powell and surname of Miller. And then you will return this corresponding object. So this is kind of like what NoSQL database is like. And so there are like many types of NoSQL databases. Actually, what does it mean by NoSQL database? It's just like database that do not use SQL. Database that's not like formatted in a table way. We call it NoSQL databases. And in today's lecture, we're going to talk about like MongoDB. And MongoDB is like one database that's super popular among like especially like JavaScript users. So people really like to connect Express to MongoDB. It's pretty intuitive to learn and also pretty intuitive to use. Yeah. And before we get into the actual like connecting the server to the database, are there any questions? Cool. Okay. So now let's okay. So there are like a bunch of code here, and feel free to just like copy and paste it to our like VS Code. And essentially here, let me show you. Yeah, so this is essentially this. As this, it may seem like a lot of code, but what it's actually trying to do is just a very dummy to-do app. If you've like, I believe Irvin talked about Express, so he will probably use something very similar to that. And the idea behind like this bunch of code is very simple. So essentially, like first of all, we create an Express app, and then we like use a body parser and a bunch of stuff. So as you can see here, it's a router method. Router method is essentially a way for you to let you know that when you access this particular URL, you will be greeted by like this following message. So until this point, it should all be like review. And essentially, as you can see here, it's by visiting the root URL, you will get a message, welcome to the to-do app. Let's try it. Actually, like how to start this web server, you do it by running npm run start. So essentially, like, yeah, you just type this in, and then you can start it. And if you haven't like, so essentially, like if you just copy this code into a file and then run npm run start, it won't actually run. You have to do like everything. So you need to do npm init, followed by like npm install all the like required package, which is like only Express. After you install Express, then you can run npm run start. Yeah, so let me actually type this in Notion. So preparation. Oops. So copy the code into your editor. npm init, and then npm install Express, and then you can run npm run start to start the server. Cool. And once you copy the code and paste it in, you run start. Notice that we are not actually visiting the localhost 8080. We're visiting localhost 8080/API. And why is that? Because here's the little hack here. So essentially, like by calling app.use API, you'll essentially default the root URL to /API instead of like only a slash. So essentially here, you see that router method here is saying that the method of the root URL. And the root URL, however, usually if we don't do that line of code, we visit the root URL this way. However, right now we do it this way. So essentially, like, but you need to add the API afterwards. Cool. As you can see, after we visit the root URL, the user will be greeted by the message, welcome to the to-do app. And essentially, like, yeah, this is just like a dummy message saying that the user has successfully connected to our database, connected to our backend server. And let's try to see what this method is trying to do. So it's to-dos. So essentially right now, as you can see, since we haven't connected our backend to our database, this is just really a dummy method to return all to-dos. And after we've created our our actual database, and here we'll actually return the all to-dos that the user can add. So as you can see here, there's a get endpoint for to-dos, and you can return all to-dos. There's also a post method here that allows you to create a new to-do, and we'll be sending post requests through Postman. And actually, do y'all have everyone talked about Postman? Just want to make sure. If not, I can cover it briefly. Postman's Postman. It's an app. Let me see in chat. Irvin did a bit. Can we cover it? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I can. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I can cover it. It's actually pretty simple to use. As long as you have that on your computer installed, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. Actually, let's cover it now because I feel like this will be a pretty good time. Yeah, so essentially what does Postman do is to send requests. As you can see here in the browser, when we are visiting the app/to-dos endpoint, we are trying to send a get method to the backend server, and then the server will return the corresponding message. So here you're seeing that this get method is in charge of returning all the to-dos. And when the browser visits this URL, it sends a GET request to our server, and then the server returns this. However, there's no no way for the browser to just by visiting the URL and send a post request. And how do we do this? Is essentially by using Postman. And Postman is essentially a way for you to wait. Why can't I move my? Oh jeez. Oh, okay. Yeah, Postman is essentially a way for you to simulate browser behavior. So you can create a new request by doing new collection, backend primer demo, and then you can do this and add request. And then so for instance, if we want to send a get request, okay, so get all to-dos. Let's try to do this. So save to backend primer demo. And so you can see here, it's a new request being added. And what will be the request URL? The request URL would just essentially be this. So since we're visiting the /to-dos URL, and the root URL is essentially this, you add to-dos afterwards, and then you should be able to get the corresponding message. So let's see. And notice that here the method is get, okay? And when you use the get method, you can kind of access this method, and the server will trigger this method, and it will send the message return all to-dos. So let's try out. After we hit send, as you can see here, it says message return all to-dos. And this is a very easy way for you to interact with the backend server. So right now we don't really need to use the browser anymore. And so let's say we want to send a post request. Okay, let's actually create a new request. So add request post, create a. Wait, actually, what does this to-do do? Yeah, create a to-do. And let's go to this. So the URL would be the same. Why is it the same? Because we are trying to access the same endpoint. As you can see here, the endpoints to-dos, and there are two methods on this endpoint. One's the get method, and one's the post method. And so we just finished accessing the get methods, and now let's try to access the post method. So to access the post method, you need to change the get method here to post. Okay, so really simple. And then you click, As you can see here, in the post request, it's accessing request.body.content, which means that in our request, the body here should actually contain something. So how do we do this? We can go to form data, and there's like key and value pair. Here we need request.body.content, which means that the key should be like content, and the value will be a need to do. So let's say buy milk. Okay, let's try send. Oops, why is that undefined? Okay, that's weird. Let me try this. Okay, that's pretty weird. Let me do. Okay, let me figure out why is it content buy milk. Okay, yeah. So probably there's some bug using the form data. So instead of using form data, let's just use raw. And raw is essentially a way for you to like encode raw JSON data. JSON data is like super simple. It's essentially bracket, and then you include the property and the value attribute. So here we're the method is trying to access request.body.content. And so we provide a content field inside our body. And then the content field has a value of buy milk. And after we send this post request, as we can see that we get this as a result, as a response. And the response is saying that message, create a new to-do, one buy milk, to-do ID is one, content is buy milk. However, it's actually not really adding it to the database because we don't really have any database yet. As you can see, this is like just returning the message and not doing anything. So yeah. Actually, till this point, are there any questions for Postman? Or like just server in general? Well, there's something in chat. Let's see. How do we delete a post? Okay, yeah, great question. Yeah, I'm going to cover that real quick. So yeah, okay. So let's talk about the other endpoint. So essentially, like there are like two endpoints. One, which is like the to-dos endpoint, and there's like two methods, get methods and post method. And there's also another endpoint, the to-dos, this to-do ID endpoint. And this includes the get method, put method, and also a delete method. And this is where you can delete a post or like delete a to-do ID. And essentially, let's look at this one by one. So first of all, what does this mean? This is essentially saying that you'll match the pattern of to-dos followed by a to-do ID. And so essentially, if we create a new to-do, so let's say get one to-do. Okay. And the URL would be this, and plus a to-do ID. So let's say we want to get the first to-do. Okay. After we hit send, we can see that it returns this message because it's actually like it's just returning this. It's not really that exciting, but essentially like in the like under the hood, the to-do ID will be parsed by the backend server, and here in our case it will be one, and then the to-do ID will be also one. So essentially like this this part, like request.params.to-do ID, it will be one. And we can't really see that from get methods because get method now is like really doing nothing. So let's try another method. Let's try the put method. So let's add another request. So put update to do content. Let's change it to put. Now let's say one Yeah, I believe you need some body. So yeah, you actually also need a body.content. So let's do that. Raw JSON, so the content. So instead of buy milk, probably like buy orange juice. Okay, let's hit send. Let's see. Yeah, so essentially here we get a message, update a to-do, and followed by 1 and buy orange juice. As you can see, like 1 is dynamically like generated or get parse through this URL. Essentially, like if we change to-dos 1 to to-dos 2, if we send it again, as you can see here, the ID becomes 2. So essentially, request of parameters of to-do ID is a way for you to access to-do ID. As you can tell, this is like not really that interesting. It's just returning a message. Yeah. And let's add one more request. So the delete. So delete a to-do. So once we have that, let's copy and paste the URL. Since it's the same endpoint, we just need to copy and paste the URL. Let's change it to delete. Okay. Let's look at the delete method. You actually don't need anything in the body. And so let's just send it. And as you can see here, it's saying delete a to-do. Again, not really that interesting, but that's what we've all got right now. Cool. So any questions before we dive into databases? Okay, cool. Yeah. Now let's talk about databases. And so the database that we're going to use today is called MongoDB. And MongoDB is like, it's a pretty good database. It's very robust. Like small company use it and also large company use it. So yeah. And to install, if you are on Mac OS, it's super simple. You just do boot install. And you can also look up like any other methods to install MongoDB. I believe there's like dozens ways to install it. But essentially, you need to install the community version of it. Okay. So yeah. Actually, let me just check whether I've done that. So let's do brew install Mongo community. It'll probably take a while. Oh shoot, it's updating the. Okay, yeah. Yeah, we'll skip the install for now. Let's see. I hope I have installed. Yeah, I have installed it. Cool. And so essentially a way for you to check whether MongoDB community version is successfully installed, you just run Mongo. And after you type Mongo, you will start this like interactive Mongo shell that you can use to like interact with the database. And to create a database, we use the use keyword in the Mongo shell. And so essentially it's pretty simple. So let's do use database tutorial. Okay. So use database tutorial. Yeah, essentially that's it. And now we have the database ready in our computer just by running like one line of code. This is like super simple. Also to connect to MongoDB, we will need kind of a application interface for Express app. And to use it, we need to install MongoDB. So let's do. We need to install Mongoose. Mongoose is a way. It's kind of like an interface for Express to interact with MongoDB. So let's install it. Cool. Okay, it's pretty fast. And now we can try to like connect our Mongo databases with the server file. And now let's go to our server. And then this lines are essentially like the lines that you can use to connect the server to the MongoDB database. Let me just copy and paste it here and explain. Okay, so you can see here, first of all, we request the mongoose. Essentially, we import the mongoose, and then we will have like a URL. And this URL corresponds to like the database that you've just created. So in our case, it's like MongoDB, blah, 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 and followed by database tutorial, which is like the name of the database that we've just created, which is like right here. And how do you find like this URL before? Is you can find it here. So essentially, you can see it in your MongoDB shell. Yeah. So in case if the position is like not the same, you should need to know like how to find it. Yeah. After you type Mongo, you can see the URL here. So yeah. And so this is just a database URL. And how do you connect the backend server with the DB? It's super simple. You just do this. Essentially, Mongoose connect URL with the option use new URL parser. This is just a way for you to like suppress some warnings. You don't really need to add that because like warnings are just warnings. You can like ignore them. But I add them to like, yeah, suppress the warnings. And after you do this, you need to like establish a connection. So this is just saying that it's connected. However, we need to establish like an actual connection. We need to have a DB variable. And how do we get the DB variable? We do mongoose.connection. And this way it will return a database variable and all the operations that we're going to operate on the database, we're going to operate on the database variable. And so, yeah, and we also do this. So db.one is open. It's essentially saying that we'll open the database and like, yeah. And if also db.error, this is just essentially a way for you to catch error if database connection somehow like failed or like there's something wrong in the code. This is a way to like catch the error. Okay, so let's run npm run start again. As you can see here, now instead of like only saying the server listening on port 8080, it also says that database connected to the this URL. It's just essentially it's saying that the database is successfully connected. You can see there's like a warning here. It's like MongoDB got some like warnings from time to time. You can pass this option into the Mongo client constructor. So essentially here, you can also not do that. I'll just not do it because like there are like too many warnings. But yeah. And so this is like how we get connected to the database. Are there any questions so far? Any question related to setup or like installing? Cool. Okay. So now let's talk about how do we actually create the MongoDB model. So essentially, what's a model? Model is the scheme that's kind of like behind the database. So as you can imagine, like when you just create a database, it's just empty and it doesn't know what kind of data it will be stored. And this is not really something that we want. We wanted to know like what kind of data they store before we like parsing any data. And to let the database know what kind of data they will encounter, we create a scheme. And the scheme will essentially tell the database what kind of like what types of data that you will be encountering. And so how do we create a MongoDB model and also like scheme? We do this. So first of all, we get the schema from the Mongoose just by doing this. And then we we use a schema constructor to construct like our schema. And here we only need the content variable. Essentially, like since we're actually building a to-do app, we only need the content because like there's nothing else, to be honest, to a to-do app. And notice that actually here we haven't included like any to-do IDs. Why don't we do that? Because like the MongoDB will automatically add a underscore ID field to the schema. So we only need to create a content field. And this content field will be a type string, and it will essentially store everything that we've passed as a body.content, which is like in our previous case, it will be by milk and also by orange juice. And after we create the schema, we can like inject the schema into the database by using the mongoose model. And this will create kind of like a to-do database inside our like database tutorial. And now let's create our like first access endpoint. And the endpoint will be create. Essentially, like it will be this post endpoint. And this post endpoint is in charge of like creating a new to-do. And I think this will be probably a good way to start our tutorial. So let's copy and paste it here. Essentially, as you can see, there's like not really that much have changed. And the most important thing is how do we actually create a new to-do entry for the database? We do this by calling the new to-do. The to-do is like the model that we've just created up here. And we can call new to-do and followed by an object. And the object should be like the same as it is shown in the schema. So here in the schema, it's an object with content and a string. And here it should also be the same. So as you can see, here's the object with the content and the string. And the request body.content, because like we know that we are passing a string, so we don't really need to do any type checking. And afterwards, this can help us to create a new to-do. And to save the new to-do into our database, because like this is actually just creating it in the memory. And to actually save it on the local system, or on the local database, we do to-do.save. And after we call to-do.save, we pass in a callback function. And this callback function will essentially be called after the save is finished. So after we call to-do.save, we pass in a callback function. And the function has like two arguments. One's error, which is like if there's any error happening. One's document. Document is kind of like the response from the database. We don't really need it. So yeah. And we just directly return this JSON message. As you can see here, we return the to-do ID this way. Essentially, after you create the new to-do and then you save it, the MongoDB database will automatically give this to-do object a underscore ID field. And this underscore ID field will become the ID of our to-do, essentially kind of like a unique identifier of our to-do. For the message, we just return, create a new to-do, blah, 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 to-do ID, and we also return the content. Now let's see. So let's test this out. Let's call npm run start. Let's go back to our Postman and go to the post request because we are trying to like create a new to-do. Let's try to create a to-do with the content of by milk. So let's do this. As you can see here, the to-do ID may be a little bit weird because like it's automatically generated. It's like 0 and 1 nicely incremented. But here we got a to-do ID and also we get the to-do content, which is by milk. And here, as you can see, we get the to-do ID and also by milk. And okay, let's look at this to-do ID and try to remember it. So essentially it's 5FAF. Let's try to create a new to-do, another to-do, okay? So it's by milk, let's do by chocolate milk. Let's send it. As you can see here, the to-do ID actually changes. Yeah, though the first few may remain the same, but yeah, it actually changes. We can create it again. So this ends with A to 8. Let's try again. See if we can actually buy chocolate milk. Oh, as you can see here, it increments from 28 to 29, and this is kind of like a sign that MongoDB is actually storing something. So let's try add another one. So buy orange juice. Yeah, so you can see like 29 actually become 2A. Yeah, so essentially like why not becomes 30? Because like it's actually storing it in 16 base. It's like hexadecimal, and A just stands for 10. And yeah, and essentially this I can kind of like prove our database is working. Yeah, any questions for this endpoint? Okay, if you have any questions, just post it in chat. I will check it like regularly. Okay, so once we finish the create endpoint, let's try to get the get endpoint, okay? And this get endpoint is essentially a way for you to return all the to-dos. Let's copy and paste the code. It's often called retrieve endpoint as well. So let's do that. Okay, as you can see, like it's super easy to like get all the to-do entries in the to-do database. And how do we do that? We essentially do to-do.find. To-do is the model that we've just created, and you call the .find method on it, and it will automatically like return all the to-dos inside to-do database. And how do you get like all the to-dos inside the database? You can do a .then method. .then is essentially like kind of like a promise, and then you get the return result, which is the to-dos, and then the to-dos you can just pass in the result. Yeah, so let's see. Let's run it again. And this time, instead of like the post endpoint, let's use the get endpoint. As you can see here, there's like a bunch of stuff. Oh wait, why is there like so many? Okay, yeah, that's pretty weird. Okay, so as you can see, like there are like bunch of other. Oh yeah, cause like okay, so why is there's already like 1 and 2 and 3 Because like I believe like when I was like making this tutorial, after I finished it, I forgot to like clean up or like delete the database. So yeah, you can see some like remains here and there. Yeah, essentially, but you can also see like the 4 to-dos that we've just created. So essentially here's ID, here's the content, there's also version. It should just be like the version of the database. We're not really updating anything. So yeah, we can just ignore the fail. Yeah. And this endpoint allows us to like essentially like call .find method on all the to-do, and it will return all to-dos as a list format. And then you can directly return it, or if you want, you can like do some parsing on it or return like specific parts of it. That's also fine. But here right now, for simplicity's sake, we're just returning everything in a list format. As you can see, this is a square bracket, which means it's a list. And these are all just like stuff inside a list. So yeah, this is our get endpoint. And now let's move on to the, yeah. And now we have finished the this endpoint, the to-dos endpoint. And now let's move on to this endpoint. And this endpoint is all the methods that's related to, so like all the to-dos is related to one to-do. And here, as you can see, there's a retrieval endpoint, there's an update endpoint, there's also a delete endpoint. Let's look at the retrieval endpoint first. So this endpoint, instead of like retrieving all the to-dos, we're just trying to retrieving one of the to-do. And the to-do should be retrieved. The to-do that we retrieve should be retrieved corresponding to this to-do ID. So let's see. Okay. Wait, why did? Okay, that's weird. Yeah, I probably like accidentally paste something. Okay, this is pretty weird. Okay, so essentially, I probably accidentally placed something here. So yeah, instead of like, yeah, that's so weird. Okay, so this should be correct. Okay, yeah, I probably like copy and paste the save endpoint there. Let's copy and paste it here. Yeah, so essentially like, how do we retrieve one particular ID according to the IDs? And wait, what the heck? Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. This is weird. Okay. And now this code should be working. Let's try and paste it here. Double check. Okay. Yeah. Essentially, this is how you will find one to do according to the ID. And how do you do that? Instead of using the find method, you use a find by ID method. Essentially, if the user provide like one to do ID, and then first of all, we get the to do ID by calling request of params.to-do ID. This way we can like get what the user says in the request URL. And then we input it to the find by ID method. And the find by ID method will find the corresponding to-do which has this ID. And we also passing a callback function. And the callback function will be processing like the to-do that's being returned. So if there's an error, we'll return a message saying that error when getting the content of the to-do. If there's no error, we just like send it, get the content from the to-do. Actually, let's add an else to it right now. Cool. Essentially, we just return the to-do as a result if we actually successfully fetch the to-do. So let's see. So we run it again, and we go to Postman and get one to-do. And actually, first of all, we need to get a to-do ID because like it's very long. So let's say we want to get the buy milk to-do, okay? And I'm copying and pasting the ID here. So yeah, and let's send it. So you can see here, besides this message, we also get the relevant information of the to-do. So essentially, we get the to-do ID, we also get the content, which is pretty neat. However, what will happen if we are trying to accessing a to-do that's like not valid to-do ID? Let's send it. And you can see here the to-do will return now. Because like if you're using find by ID, if it doesn't like find anything, you won't actually trigger an error. So essentially like error only happens when there's something wrong with the code or there's something wrong with the databases. If there's like nothing wrong, it will just return null. So essentially like databases handle this particular error for you, or like it doesn't really consider this as error. It just think that it doesn't find anything. So yeah. Let's change it back to the normal to do. Let's get it, and as we can see, we get the buy milk method. We get the buy milk to do. Now, so since we finished the get methods, let's now work on the put method. So what does this put method do? The put method is used to update a to-do's content. So say if I don't want to buy milk anymore, or I think the content, like this 363 is like super stupid. And I kind of want to update this. And we use the put method. And how do we update an entry in the MongoDB database? So let's see. To update a to-do, you can copy and paste it here. Essentially, we're using very similar methods, very similar to find by ID. We just use find ID and update the methods name is this. So yeah, it's like super easy to use. And by calling find by ID and update, you first of all pass in the to-do ID, which is like request occurrence ID. And then you pass in the content that you want to be updated. So essentially here, we are returning, we are passing the content that's passing in the body, in the request body, and then we give it like a content attribute, and then we pass in as an object. So this should be exactly the same as the schema. So the schema above, as we can see here, we define it to be content string. And here the update content is also like content and string. And first of all, it's to do ID, and then it's the update content, and then we'll have a callback method. The callback method will essentially like return. It'll essentially like happen or be called after the find by ID and update. Essentially, we just return a bunch of things. We return like the old to do and also the new to do. So yeah, let's see. Let's stop it, run it again. Let's go to the updated to do method. Cool. Let's say we want to like update this to do. So this 33333 to do. I've just copy and paste the to do ID. Let's change it here. Also for the content, let's try to say I don't know, finish CS194 project 5, which is something that I actually should do. And let's call send. As you can see, like we get some response. It says update to do followed by the ID, and it gives us the old to do, which is like the old to do ID and also the content, which is like a bunch of stupid 3. And right now the new to do becomes like finish CS194 project 5. And we can actually try to refresh it. So as you can see here, there are like 3 threes. If we send it again now, there are only 2 threes. One of them is being updated by the finish CS194 project 5. Essentially, this is a way for you to like interact with the databases and update like the content within it. And all the returning value, you can essentially return everything. You can return anything really. And here I've chosen to return the old to do and also the new to do. And one thing to be careful about is that the callback function, the to do here, actually is the old to do. You want to return the old to do instead of the new to do that's being updated. So yeah, and this is how we like get access to the old to do. So cool. Before we move on, any other questions? Any questions? Why this is like, this is so creepy. Why this is like blinking? What the heck? Cool, no questions. So let's talk about the delete method. The delete method should be like pretty straightforward as well. Let's look at the delete to do. We copy and paste it in. Instead of using the find by ID and update method, we use find by ID and delete method. So we only need to like pass in the to do ID of the to do instead of like the content, because like we are just like deleting it. And after we pass in the to do ID, we also need to pass in a callback function. This should all be like a very common pattern by now. And essentially, the callback method takes in error and also to do. The to do is the to do that's being deleted, and we also return the corresponding like to do. So let's see. Okay, let's go to delete to do. Let's say we want to delete this to do. Let's say 7 wants to do. I've just copy and paste the to-do ID here. We send it. And so you can see the to-do content that's being deleted. This is 11111. And if we go to the get all to-dos and send it again, as you can see here, the one disappears. And let's say that we want to delete this one as well. So let's copy and paste it here. Let's delete it. So this should be deleted. If we send it again, send the get all request again, as you can see, the two to-dos is also being deleted. So that's for the delete endpoint. Yeah, I believe that's all of the lecture today. Are there any questions? This should be like a pretty straightforward introduction to the databases. Okay, I will stop the recording.